Hey, how's it going, guys? This is Tom from UDS with another edition of the Quarantine Sessions, where I chat to people a lot cooler than myself in the wonderful land of lockdown. Now, full disclosure, this is the second time we've tried to do this interview, thanks to our good friend, Technical Problems. So my guests this week already have my infinite thanks for their patience. But for anyone listening at home, I am of course talking to a London-based band who were formed from the unlikely merging of jazz fusion and black metal projects. Their unique sound is primed to take the scene by storm with their debut album dropping very, very soon. It is my pleasure to introduce for the second time, arguably the most handsomest band performing today, Rob and James from Asian Death Crustacean.
Thanks very much for having us, mate.
we just got to stop meeting like this, haven't we? How are you guys doing since yesterday, I guess?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Not much changed in 24 hours. Still in the same place. So yeah, keep it on there. So yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? It's been sort of the highs of having a great chat with you, to the absolute lows of realizing the whole thing was gone, to the highs that you said that I get more of your time, which is obviously a pleasure for me. But for the unfortunate few who may not have heard of you, in your own words, would you just mind quickly introducing Asian Death Crustacean?
Yeah, we're a four-piece experimental metal band based out of London. We're instrumental, so yeah, we tend to have most of our focus around, just exploring the compositional ideas to their fullest extent. I'd say is one of our tropes as a band, and yeah, we like to see where it goes, basically.
Awesome. And one thing I didn't ask you yesterday, which to my shame, I absolutely should have. Asian Death Crustacean is one of the best names for a band I have ever heard before. Is there any sort of meaning or origin story for this, or was it just something that you picked because it sounded cool?
Well, it's a band name that I kind of just came up with pretty kind of early on in the band's life. There isn't really any particular literal meaning to it. But I guess, the most you could say maybe is that over time it's sort of come to sort of feel maybe sort of appropriate to it. There's something that feels like appropriate about it in the sense that maybe it's got a little bit of playfulness to it, but it's got also a little bit of kind of aggression to it with the death in the middle, obviously. So, there's no particular literal meaning. But yeah, it does make us very easy to search for online, though, which is very useful.
Well, that's it. That's the mistake I fell into, because our origin story for our band name is very similar, that it was just sort of something that we thought sounded cool. But you do have to scroll through about 3 pages of literal upside down sharks before you get to us. So that was a mistake on my part, but you live and learn. And in the effort of just getting to know each other a little bit better, obviously I asked you the trademark sandwich question yesterday, so I won't do that again. But for Asian Death Crustacean as a whole, if it was a type of condiment, what kind of condiment would Asian Death Crustacean be?
Well,
I have to get even more obscure this time around.
Yeah, definitely asking the hard-hitting questions today, aren't you?
Yeah, well, what if there was a sauce that was a cinnamon flavored dessert sauce? What about that?
Do you think it'd be sweet or savoury?
Sweet. Cinnamon's sweet, isn't it?
Yeah. And
kind of refined, isn't it?
Yeah, but
it doesn't exist yet, but you want it to.
Cinnamon doesn't exist.
Cinnamon sauce. I don't think it exists, does it? I've never seen it.
Wow.
If it doesn't exist, it should, much like Asian Death Crustacean. But the thing is that cinnamon also has quite a bit of kick, doesn't it? People a couple of years ago were doing that cinnamon challenge where they tried to keep a spoonful of it in their mouth. And I like the idea that it also shows that, you have that bite to go with the sweetness. I think it's very, very appropriate. I don't know where it turned out that way. Yeah. There we go. So at the time of recording, your debut album Baikal is less than a month away, dropping June 26th. What can people expect from this release?
I think, I guess to add to the basic outline that Rob gave, kind of like an experimental metal album, I guess if I was to try to say something more specific to set it apart from other kind of stuff in like progressive or experimental metal, I guess whereas a lot of bands that use that tag, like let's say maybe like Faceless or Cynic might be more like classic kind of progressive metal band, whereas they tend to have a slightly more, let's say, sort of like static kind of aesthetic, whereby there be a very like consistent sound throughout the album. In the case of Baikal, we went for a bit more of a sort of like developmental kind of feel, whereby there are kind of really quite distinct phases that the album goes through. So it will kind of, so instead of having sort of, for example, like certain sort of maybe slightly jazzy elements occasionally sort of appearing or giving a sort of slight sort of shading to a certain section or two, the album really kind of more sort of commits to, for maybe like a couple of minutes at a time, sometimes becoming like committing way more into that kind of feel and going through a bit more of a kind of bit more of a journey through different sort of different stages, different like phases of its life as it goes through. So yeah, hopefully it's a bit of a slightly different kind of take on progressive or experimental metal in terms of its structure. It's what people might be used to.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so at the same time, like for bits within that, even though we are like developing things like over like a few minutes at a time, so we do like I think we tend to like move on pretty quickly with the way we develop ideas. Like we don't tend to sit on like individual sections for too long. We tend to like kind of keep progressing them at a fairly like, I'd say, fast rate compared to, I don't know, like I guess a good example would be Russian Circles. When they do like they'll sit on a section for like 2 or 3 minutes and like kind of it'll have like its own kind of scope within that, and they'll kind of like fully develop it within that. But I don't know, I guess compared to them, we kind of like develop a little bit differently, quicker, not necessarily better or worse, but just at a different pace, I'd say. So.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you could maybe say that like the way that we use kind of the pace of change is also like we kind of view that as almost, and you could view that as another form of like a musical device. So sometimes like at the beginning of like part 5 of the album, we sit on a way like heavier, more kind of bludgeoning kind of tone for quite a while, like maybe like 4 minutes or something. So, but that's kind of part of trying to give that very sort of different feeling of like really sitting in that tone for a long time and seeing it through. Whereas, for example, like I think in maybe Baikal 3, for example, part 3, there's a way faster kind of changeover between different feels and way more change in tempo, as well as some like jumping between some different time signatures, which gives a slightly more like agitated, like almost out of control at times kind of feel of kind of jumping between different kind of moods. So yeah, it's kind of, we're kind of using kind of, that pace of change as yet another kind of device in the toolkit for creating kind of different feelings within the album, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. And obviously for an album that's as intricate and you know as complex in its structure as Baikal, you said it took about 6 years from sort of start to completion to make this album. And I'm one of those people that really struggles to do anything for 6 minutes, let alone 6 years. So I wanted to know sort of how did you keep sort of the creative discipline to sort of work on this project for so long?
Try new ideas, I'd say, is the main thing, because I mean, like it wasn't 6 years of like continuous development of the songs. It's like, you know, we'd write bits of it, like we'd think we had it finished, move on to like, you know, the next section of the song or whatever, and then, you know, once you get to that next section, you'd be like, hang on a minute, that doesn't quite, you know, the previous section, you could maybe think of a few different like concepts or ideas like to kind of make it a bit more like coherent, or kind of maybe link up a bit differently, or, you know, obviously once you got like a bit more of a clear idea of the scope of what you're composing overall for the piece, you get to get a bit of a clearer direction with where you want to kind of, you know, how you want to bring it into that from that and kind of get it to flow a little better. So it's definitely like a very incremental approach with that kind of thing, I would say, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like Rob's saying, I'd say it's like kind of like both incremental and also sort of iterative and kind of almost like cyclical in the process, because as Rob was saying, like you get to the end of a certain section, maybe what might at that time feel like the end of almost a certain piece, but then either in the context of the next piece or in the context of maybe an ambient like section that's going to bridge things, different like sections and ideas take on different kind of context, and means that you get different ideas. And also over that time, over that 6 years, our kind of the palettes of the things that we're listening to, the things that we're into, the different ideas we have about things to include, things that we're less keen on, This means that the pieces like subtly, you know, just evolve over time. And then as a final step, once we actually got to the point of finally recording them and like including all kinds of guitar layers, especially that for practical reasons you just couldn't really include live. That again brought out a whole further kind of final step of kind of evolving these pieces, giving them extra depth in various places that kind of really, and some of these layers actually, because I hadn't actually heard them all together really, like through amps before hearing them in the studio, some of those layers actually brought like a very different tonality, very different kind of mood to some of the sections that I was quite surprised by, and actually brought a lot to the album. That wasn't there before that very final stage.
Yeah, you get very used to kind of just hearing it in kind of like the live context where it's just like the four of us, which obviously makes it a lot more limited with what you can do. So when you got that extra like, room for creativity, it's I think it's definitely wise to take advantage of it, particularly if it's the kind of thing that you want to be doing, like in terms of like trying out different compositional, I guess, textures. Because obviously the more layers you've got, the more kind of dense of a sound you've got, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Jens Bogger and David Castillo, the people that kind of, I guess, helped us record and like produce and mix it in Sweden, they were actually really helpful in guiding that kind of final process, because when you've got the sort of in places like a huge number of different layers, different ideas, and so many different options to play with these in terms of the effects pedals, you can run these through the amp head combinations, etc., etc. At some point, it's just really useful to have someone who's been there and done a few hundred albums to know, okay, guys, I mean, these are all great ideas, but you're going to need to get rid of 20% of these layers because there's just one too many here. Or, you're going to need to choose between this amp head combination and that, or this effects pedal and that, and how much kind of you want to put on it. And it's just very useful to have someone who really gets the project, but also has that kind of experience to guide it through that last stage, which is very like time sensitive, obviously, because you can't sit in the studio for 2 weeks and try every conceivable combination of these layers. You have to make a decision like in a few minutes with each one, realistically.
So speaking of the studio, you say you went to Sweden at Fascination Street Studios. What sort of led to this decision to go all the way over there to record Baikal?
Well, I think for quite a long time in kind of thinking about the recording, we identified early on in sort of standing back and assessing like the combination of elements that's in the album, in terms of the heavy passages on the one side and the much lighter stuff, and then the ambient stuff that got added as we went on. The kind of mix you see in albums like, for example, Watershed by Opeth was actually a really good model for the kind of mix of things we had, as in it's quite an organic feeling sound. It has a good bit of kind of natural feel to it, but it also has a lot of weight and also a lot of kind of clarity in the mix. Like you can really hear all the things that are going on. So we identified that kind of style of mix as a really good candidate for how to proceed. And then ultimately we decided, well, I mean, why not just go straight to the source, get straight to the people that actually did that. And they were doing it. So just like, well, we've got to go for it, basically. Yeah.
That's amazing. So how long were you out in Sweden for?
We were out there we spent a week in Stockholm recording drums and doing all the sort of reamping of like clean guitars, and then another week doing mixing and reamping of heavy guitars in Örebro, which is like a smaller like town, more in like the center of Sweden.
I've always wanted to visit. I'm sure it was very, very beautiful out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the title Baikal is I believe we discussed yesterday, is a reference to one of the oldest lakes in the world. Does this play into the themes of the album at all, or either on sort of a literal or an abstract level?
I think when it comes to Baikal and sort of the themes of the album in general, it's not really kind of a concept album in the same sense that, let's say, like The Wall by Pink Floyd is like a concept album, for example, in that we didn't kind of sit down beforehand and think, okay, well, what would be a cool concept, and then write music to that. Rather, like over the course of the long kind of process of putting together the music, it's more that kind of various sort of themes and ideas kind of came out of that, out of thinking about these things. So so more specifically with like Baikal, which, as you say, is like I think the largest and deepest, or the deepest and oldest lake in the world. It's not really that it's about that lake, but more that Baikal, I guess, as both like a sort of a word in the way that it looks and sounds, and like the concept of it has a sort of certain feeling to it, a certain atmosphere of it, of being this kind of vast, kind of unknown, almost slightly alien thing that you could take in sort of almost quite a sort of almost sci-fi kind of sense. Like it could almost be a bit like the name of a planet in a sci-fi novel, or you could take it in sort of almost like a sort of Mastodon-esque kind of sense of kind of journeying into this kind of Siberian wasteland kind of thing. And it kind of just leaves kind of the meaning of it quite sort of open to interpretation, kind of reading, sort of allowing people to read what they want into it, I guess. Yeah.
Anyway, we mentioned yesterday your band bucket list of some of the things you wanted to achieve. And Rob, you said that playing live was one of sort of the more fulfilling parts of sort of the process of being in a band. Yeah, and so just going on from that, is there a venue or a place in the world that you would love to play most of all? I suppose that's a question for both of you.
Ooh, I wouldn't say like a particular venue, but I definitely think that playing smaller, more intimate venues is definitely, it's kind of more rewarding. Like we have done a couple of gigs on like bigger kind of like stages and stuff. Like the one, like we've done one on like an arena stage at one point, but it was just like, it just doesn't really kind of feel the same. Like I think like the kind of the more intimate atmosphere of a smaller gig just kind of it's kind of more conducive to the experience. I think that's kind of both sides of it as well. Like whether it's like watching a gig and playing a gig, it's like I think it's just kind of better, to be perfectly honest. So
I would 100% agree.
Yeah, so not anywhere particular, but yeah, smaller the better. Not necessarily, but you know, house gigs are really fun. We've done a few house party gigs, but yeah, that's one of the best ones.
Very cool. When the ceiling's caving in mainly.
Yeah, up until that point, generally speaking, it tends to be better. You tend to be pretty limited after that, but yeah.
That's about as far as you can go. What about you, James? Is there anywhere in the world that you would like to perform?
I mean, if I had to pick one kind of sort of dream kind of location, I did once get to visit, although not when it was being used for a gig, visit Red Rocks in Colorado. That's an amazing kind of venue, and like not too large. It is a bit of like an amphitheater kind of like setup, so it's not kind of like a sweaty kind of basement venue. So it would have like a very, very different atmosphere. But I think, yeah, for the kind of music that we make, this kind of instrumental has quite sort of like a sort of you know, almost like sort of like a spacious kind of like feel to it. Like I think. Yeah, I mean, it could work quite well. But I mean, that's obviously like, that would be a bit of a dream. But
and certainly fit with the album aesthetics, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
100%. Now, this is a segment we didn't do yesterday because normally it goes down really badly and it's really plagiarized. But I'm going to do it anyway. It's called Desert Island Discs. We haven't got time to do the whole shtick. So I ask you, you're on a desert island, quarantined from the rest of the world individually. You can take one album, one film, and one luxury item with you. What would they be? It's the album one is the hardest for everyone, I think.
I'm assuming we've got like the equipment to, you know, watch the film already. I don't need to bring that as my luxury item, right?
Yeah, no. It's assumed that there's some ethereal way of watching a film and listening to the music.
Cool. All right, I got that. Luxury items, guitar. I'll assume the strings won't break. Album, Crack the Sky. I'll go with that just because that's one of like my all-time favorite albums, and start to finish, absolute fucking masterpiece.
Absolutely.
Film. I don't know for that one. Castaway, I suppose.
Wow,
see if I can get some tips. See if we can get some tips to get back home. Like, you know.
Very appropriate. Very appropriate.
I mean, the guitar's a good shout, actually. I would have totally forgotten to say drum kit, but I mean, I guess I'll say drum kit. We'll keep it musically relevant. In terms of film, I don't know. I mean, I'll just say There Will Be Blood. It's a pretty great one. I've watched that quite a few times. I think I could definitely watch it again.
Yeah, makes me want a milkshake at the end.
Oh yeah, and in terms of music, it's one of those questions where as soon as anyone asks you this, you can be. Yeah, I did think of going for Crack the Sky.
Did you?
But that's gone now. I did, yeah, I actually did. I guess I'll go for. Well, I mean, recently I've actually been listening to like a huge amount to the latest Ulcerate album. Like, not a band that a lot of people necessarily heard of, but I think like 100% worth checking out. So yeah, probably one of the Ulcerate albums I'll go for, just because I've been listening to it a lot recently.
Very good. I'll have to check that out. So none of us can really plan for the rest of 2020. It is a strange time to be alive, to say the least. But the best you can, what does the rest of 2020 have in store for Asian Death Crustacean?
Yeah, I mean, more immediately, like over the next month, and I guess 3 months, give or take, after that, we're going to be obviously like just pushing this album, promoting it, trying to essentially give it like the best chance of success in the different ways that are possible. And then moving on from that, after that, we're currently we're working on newer compositions as well. I mean, obviously we've got with that, you've got the whole new paradigm of having to do it from like a remote situation rather than all being able to kind of write together, because historically obviously that's how we've written stuff, but as well as that, because I live up north and so does James as well, and the other two members are down south, so strictly speaking we're not like all like a London based band, so obviously kind of the practicalities of our living situations are pretty much identical to how we're having to write now anyway, so it's kind of like, it's kind of good in a sense because it's forcing us to essentially trying to come up with an approach or like a methodology that kind of services how we are essentially going to have to write music a lot of the time. And it's interesting for sure, because it's pretty difficult, because I find a lot of the time it's easiest as a guitarist anyway, or as like being in a band with two guitarists, like a lot of the ideas initially, like the seeds of the ideas kind of come up when you're just like having a jam.
100%.
Obviously, if you don't have that kind of dynamic, like it's like you could like sit and have like a Zoom conversation, like me and Dan or something jamming, but it's just not really the same. It's kind of like coming up with a different approach to kind of try and get this same kind of end result is it's a unique kind of situation and challenge, but it's something that we'll obviously be doing a lot towards the tail end of the year.
Absolutely. And is there, I mean, obviously no one can tour at the moment, but is there any plans to play live before the end of the year, if we can?
Yeah, I'd say
I mean, if we can, we'd love to, but I don't know. I mean, at the moment, I've heard suggestions, I forget where, that, the live scene might not really kind of get back to anything really resembling what it was before like mid next year, but I don't know. That's just something I read somewhere. But I mean, it seems like it could be a long journey to get back to what it was before, unfortunately. Well, I mean, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed indeed. But yes,
if we could, we would for sure. Like
and hopefully we can do this in person whenever that may be. But the last question that I normally ask is obviously, what is your favorite shark? But we did that yesterday, so I'm not going to ask you to do that again. So I'm going to flip the script and go from our name to your name. So I have to ask you guys, Rob and James, what are your favorite crustaceans?
It's got to be the peacock mantis shrimp, hasn't it? Really?
I have no idea what that is.
Is that technically a crustacean? I'm not even sure if it is. Like, I'm not a biologist.
I mean,
can't really be asked googling it anyway. You are?
Yeah.
You'll give it
we'll
to
give
me.
you that one, I think.
Yeah. Just Google it. Peacock mantis shrimp. It's like it's got it can punch so hard because it's got two tiny little clubs at the front. It can punch so hard that you can't put it in glass aquaria, because if you do, it'll just break and get out.
That sounds like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Isn't that the pistol shrimp?
I wouldn't know. I'm not David Attenborough, so I'm not really the best party to ask. I'm just chatting shit, aren't I, really? But yeah.
That's all this whole thing is, really. But what about you, James?
I think I'd go for the Japanese giant spider crab.
Oh, they're terrifying. No, they're just watery spiders, which is my worst nightmare, but they are huge.
They're a bit bigger than spiders.
Yeah. Everything's bigger in the sea. That's why the sea is arguably the most terrifying thing on planet Earth. But That's just me. That's just me and my phobias. And that's a good point to end this show on. So where can people find you online?
I think all of our profiles are just Asian Death Crustacean, so we're mainly on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube at the moment, and the full album's going to be on Spotify June the 26th. I think all the profiles are just Asian Death Crustacean. So yeah,
very cool. Very
thanks
cool.
for checking us out on the day.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for putting up with me yet again for a second evening of your lives. No one should ever be subjected to that, but I do thank you for your time and patience again.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Probably see you tomorrow, won't we?
That's it. Zoom will go bankrupt and all of their files will just disappear. But hopefully not. And anyone at home, thank you so much for watching this, if it ever does go out. And make sure to pick up Baikal on June 26th, wherever you listen to good music. We'll put links to everything you need to know in the description below. And make sure to hit subscribe for more interviews that are hopefully more technically sound than the ones we do on Skype.